Thank you, Shimei. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick Angerone, New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer and Vice Chair of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. This afternoon, myself and the Deputy Climate Resilience Officer, Natalie Augusto-Filion, will be discussing with you the Resilience Action Plan Initiative of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. Go ahead with the slides. All right, first, a little bit of background and the basis for the initiative, and nearly all the work that we've done over the last few years is Governor Murphy's Executive Order 89. EO 89 was signed by the governor in October of 2019, and it did a number of important things, not the least of which was establishing the position of Chief Resilience Officer. Perhaps most importantly, for the first time, the governor made it clear that it was the policy of the state of New Jersey that executive branch departments and agencies take proactive and coordinated efforts to protect public health and safety and to promote and protect the physical, economic, and social vitality and resilience of New Jersey's communities from the current and anticipated impacts of climate change. And everything we've done since then has stemmed from that directive. Go ahead. In addition to establishing the Chief Resilience Officer and the programs to support the effort, the executive order also established the Interagency Council. Go ahead. When it was first established, the IAC consisted of 17 state agencies. We've since expanded that to 22, and there's I think virtually every major department and agency in New Jersey is part of the group at this point. Go ahead. To ensure that the Interagency Council was in a position to do its work in an informed manner and do it to adequately address all the impacts of climate change that we face, EO 89 mandated that the Department of Environmental Protection develop a scientific report on climate change. Go ahead. That initial report was issued in June of 2020, and it brought the global issues of climate change right into New Jersey's backyards with very specific state-specific information. We've updated our understanding of climate impacts in New Jersey multiple times since then. In cooperation with the Northeast Regional Climate Center, we updated New Jersey's historic precipitation data. We've developed projections of extreme precipitation events and produced an extreme precipitation projection tool. The information is critical as we plan for and design development and infrastructure going forward. Additionally, in partnership with the Department of Health, DEP developed and released just this last fall an addendum that addresses the impacts of climate change on human health and communities. This is a critical addition to our understanding of climate impacts in the state. We often think about the destruction caused by storms such as Sandy and Ida when we think about climate change, but we need to think about the impacts more broadly. I'll also note that prior to the issuing of Executive Order 89, Rutgers University, at our behest, empaneled a scientific and technical advisory panel of experts to develop sea level rise projections specific to the state. And based on a moderate global emissions scenario, New Jersey is likely to experience 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050, 3 feet by 2070, and 5 feet by 2100. Go ahead. The executive order also, sorry for the dogs barking, also directed us to develop a resilience strategy and support efforts across state agencies to implement climate resilience actions. One of the most important things the strategy did was define resilience for New Jersey. That definition up on your screen is really a melding of resilience and adaptation, indicating that we're not just bouncing back, but that we're bouncing forward. Go ahead. There are 6 priority areas that make up the resilience strategy that are displayed here. Across all of these priority areas, there are 127 recommendations and actions for the state agencies. I hope you can see that these priority areas recognize a broad definition of resilience and the types of actions that'll be necessary. The strategy is a policy framework for New Jersey's executive branch agencies that includes forward-looking state policies that address some of our vulnerabilities to climate impacts and helps us strengthen resilience in the state. The strategy is meant to provide recommendations for how New Jersey state agencies can make changes to enhance resilience, not necessarily to be prescriptive as to how specific programs should change or what they should say. The strategy does not put a timeline on advancing these recommendations, nor does it consider the funding needed to do so. It doesn't assign any particular agency or agencies to any specific recommendations. However, in order to reach our resilience goals, we need to make those decisions and begin to act on them. Go ahead. And I'm going to turn it over now to my Deputy Resilience Officer, Natalie, to explain how we get there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. As Nick said, my name is Natalie Agosto-Filion, and I started with the department a couple months ago to help us advance some of this interagency work. So today I'm going to spend probably somewhere between 10 to 15, maybe even as many as 20 minutes sort of explaining a little bit about the direction that we're heading. And we'll be leaving at least 15 to 20 minutes for any questions that come up for you all. I want to discuss the major goals, outcomes, the components of a resilience action plan, which we for short have been calling RAPS. And while we're not going to cover every single detail today, we did put out a comprehensive scoping document that covers a lot of the expectations that you can have around what the resilience action plans are. So I highly encourage you to take a look. One of my colleagues should drop a link in the chat in a minute here to direct you to the webpage where we're capturing all of that information. Next slide, please. So our intent as the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience is to release a series of these RAPs over the next several years with the intention of laying out implementable actions that our agencies are taking, that our agencies will take, and that we should take to advance New Jersey's climate resilience. We're primarily concerned with addressing the effects that climate threats have on states' policies, programs, decision-making, such that we're consistent with the climate change resilience strategy. So each of the individual RAPs, our resilience action plans, will focus on a different and specific climate threat or impact. And the key that we're really looking for your feedback on is which of these climate threats or topics are critical from your perspectives as a collection of, experts, obviously in New Jersey, as folks who live in New Jersey, and with the various expertise that I'm sure is captured in this room. What do you think the Interagency Council should prioritize relative to extreme heat? And on the feedback form that we'll mention later, what should be our priority topics for future RAPs? So as I said, our first RAP is focused on extreme heat, and we chose this topic for a couple reasons. The first is that the climate resilience strategy was fairly limited in the degree to which we discussed extreme heat. And second of all, and really most importantly, it's one of our deadliest climate impacts we're already facing today. And we'll go into a little bit more detail in just a moment about why we're looking to act so urgently to mitigate the impacts of extreme heat. So one thing that I want to flag about what these resilience action plans are intended to address, based on the leadership of this administration, is that coordination piece. So often our state agencies are working in the silos within their specific authorities, but meaningful climate action requires intentional and strategic coordination and collaboration across those traditional boundaries of each state agency and the executive branch. It is my sincere hope that while members of the Interagency Council work together in writing this first ever RAP, we can also continue to build up that muscle memory around coordination and collaboration so that we can hit the ground running with the implementation of new actions that are going to arise through this process. Next slide, please. So a little bit of context about extreme heat, a little bit of just familiarizing us all with what we're talking about here. As I said, it's one of the deadliest impacts we're already facing. And what we've seen in terms of our observed temperature records is a pattern towards significantly hotter than average temperatures as we're moving into the 21st century. So whereas global temperatures have increased by 1.5 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the period of time that we have records for temperature in New Jersey, so about 125 years worth of temperature records. In that same exact period of time, New Jersey has warmed by 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. With the next slide, what you can see is taking that average annual temperatures for New Jersey dating all the way back to 1895. Each bar represents the average temperature for that given year. Blue tone bars, as you can expect, are indicating cooler than average year temperatures, and red tone bars indicate a warmer than average year. And it is quite obvious that there is a pattern towards warming in what we've observed. Next slide, please. So what we saw in our human health and communities addendum to the scientific report that Nick mentioned earlier is that extreme heat is directly and indirectly facing and affecting the health of New Jerseyans. One of the ways that we think about excessive heat events, heat waves, et cetera, is that they're a threat multiplier. So the existing inequities that we have related to heat-related illness, the degree of mortality, heat events make those worse. And in combination with increased temperatures, with heavy precipitation events that we've all experienced living here, the humidity, all of those can create apt conditions for the spread of infectious diseases. High temperatures are also likely to increase the formation of ground level ozone, a major component of smog, which of course increases the severity of asthma attacks, reduces lung function for folks with chronic pulmonary disease, etc. And there are certain populations of folks that are particularly vulnerable, right? Our elderly, youth, individuals with chronic health conditions, as I've mentioned, but also people who work outside, and maybe even our athletes who might be probably the most physically fit, but they also are among the vulnerable to the health impacts of extreme heat. And as I noted, it's a silent killer. It's one that we're not often thinking about. A recent study for New Jersey found that excessive heat kills on average 444 New Jerseyans. And by one study, depending on the increase in extreme heat days and days that are excessively hot, by the end of the century, this could be as many as 3,560 deaths per year if we do nothing. Some of these models are looking at a possible doubling of heat-related mortality by 2050 during the summer months. So in the next slide, you'll see that while we talk quite a lot about extreme heat and how it impacts our public health and our own ability to cool our bodies, it's affecting all of the things that we depend on, right? The air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the water we drink, the roads we drive on, which underscores why we are undertaking this effort through the New Jersey Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. We need to take action across every sector, every agency to be more resilient to this and other impacts. Now I'm going to pivot in the next couple slides to helping you understand a little bit about what to expect from the resilience action plans, what they entail. Thankfully, we are not doing this work alone. We're really lucky to have with us an advisory group of subject matter experts and national thought leaders who are helping us elevate and uplift the most promising practices and best practices from throughout the country. As far as we can tell, the New Jersey model for interagency collaboration is unique. There's not a whole lot of states that we can look to for this kind of action plan. And it offers a really great opportunity for us to adopt bits and pieces of approaches that we're seeing from all over the country. So our first ever advisory group on extreme heat specifically is a primary and ongoing source of feedback and inspiration and input as we're drafting these RAPs among the Interagency Council. And they'll be with us from the very inception all the way through the summer months when we are releasing the document for public comment. You can see on the right side here of the slide, the members that we've invited. They represent individuals from a variety of sectors, a variety of parts of the country with a diverse knowledge base around extreme heat, public policy, environmental justice, public health, transportation, etc. Next slide. So on this slide, we're giving you just a very high-level general outline of what the plans are going to look like and how we're scoping these actions. As I noted earlier, there's more detail on the scoping document that is published on our webpage. And what we're asking each agency to consider is how they can incorporate climate resilience and the impacts of various climate conditions into their policies and their decision-making frameworks on, in this case, the extreme heat topic, but obviously we'll follow a similar format each time. And one of the reasons that we're having, this early conversation with you all, members of the public and folks who are really informed and tracking this issue, is that we're looking for, input and feedback on the approach that we're following, because we'll be sort of reusing this approach each time over. So we fully anticipate that there will be agencies that have more or less to say, depending on what the specific impact is, or what the specific climate threat is, but that every agency is involved at least some level. And with the resilience action plans, we want to be really clear about the actions that we're identifying, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and keep it at a level of detail that doesn't get overly bogged down in specific, but allows it to be clear, and move past sort of our visioning foundational document of the strategy to sort of where the rubber hits the road, as it were. So while we don't expect these actions to identify really specific properties, assets, facilities that need infrastructure improvements, we do expect to see changes to maybe funding criteria in our programs, new legislation that might be needed, capacity building supports that are required for local level action, new programs or projects, as well as modifications to existing programs and projects, and the need for additional scientific understanding or data to advance the work. And certainly capturing the work that is already happening to date, that centers extreme heat, so that it's clear to sort of all the folks how New Jersey is adapting to extreme heat. And there are certain topics that are going to cut across every action: issues of funding and investment, financing, etc., ensuring that we're centering equity and environmental justice in our efforts, recognizing research gaps, and the need to be coordinated in the way we approach this work as a family of government agencies. Next slide, please. So while that's the kind of skeleton of what every resilience action plan is, the bulk of them will be the individual actions. What is it that our council members are advancing through this work? So each of the state actions, you can expect a brief narrative description, as well as an action table that lays out critical information, like what's the lead program, what's the time frame for implementing this, how does this connected to the resilience strategy, and what additional needs may exist. So we're asking our agencies to consider actions that they're already taking, gaps in the work that are related to the given topic for the resilience action plan, how it affects their ability to continue to provide the services that they do to constituents, and any co-benefits that these actions may address, which often is the case where work that is advancing, extreme heat preparedness is also improving the way we deliver services as a state. This next slide offers an example. So we wanted to give you, sort of some meat of how this might show up. So to better illustrate a little bit, this is a made-up example, but it's sort of a relevant one. This came out of inspiration from New York State, where their legislature mandated a study of extreme heat impacts in EJ communities and environmental justice communities. So you can see how the narrative here offers a little bit of the what and the why, and the action table really focuses on those hows. And we'll see, obviously, this is a fairly short write-up. It is only meant to sort of give a taster of what you can anticipate, but the length and the level of detail may vary depending on the specific action and depending on the number of agencies that may all be advancing. For example, heat illness prevention strategies for outdoor workers. There may be many agencies that are thinking about that kind of intervention. So in the next slide, I wanted to provide just a little bit of context for what we're seeing from other parts of the country in terms of the kinds of actions that relate to extreme heat. So there's sort of a category of actions that has to specifically do with folks that are exposed to extreme heat and or highly sensitive, right, your vulnerable populations. There's a series of actions that relate to the built environment and how we protect our infrastructure systems, our grid reliability during peaks in the summer season, peak demand in the summer season, our water supply and what it means for the risk of harmful algal blooms, etc. There's a category of actions that would relate to built environment, and certainly a category of actions related to our natural systems and how they may be harmed by increasing warm weather, as well as opportunities for cooling through things like urban canopy. And so these are the kinds of actions. In the next slide, what you'll see are what we're trying to accomplish. You know, ultimately, these plans are meant to be implemented in order to advance the kinds of work that you see here, right? Increasing the general level of education and awareness on various climate threats, identifying vulnerable people, assets, infrastructure, retrofitting where needed, improving coordination, and editing, changing, retrofitting, et cetera, our policies and our standards to reflect a warming planet. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about timeline. I'm sure many of you have been on calls related to state initiatives and efforts. This was one that is being sort of aggressively advanced such that we can have a public comment period in the summer months when extreme heat is most front of mind. So we're using these winter months to really deliberate, to bring in early thoughts and stakeholder input, as well as to engage our advisory group. And as I mentioned, there's a feedback form. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet. Actually, we do have a feedback form where we are hoping to get input from folks. Our aim is to release the near final draft of the extreme heat wrap this summer. And it actually also keeps us in line with the 2-year anniversary of the strategy, which was released in October of 2021. Okay, and now is the moment where I sort of pivot the microphone back over to my colleague Shimei and open up the floor for responding to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie and Nick. So right now we're opening up for some questions and answers. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand so we know if you have anything to ask, and I will enable you to unmute yourself. Also, feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you don't feel comfortable coming off mute, and I can read it out loud and direct it to the correct panelist. And also my colleague Ashley will enable the function for everyone to be able to unmute themselves. Okay, I see we have a question. Okay, feel free to come off mute. You should be able to. Deborah.
Hey there. So sorry. So just a quick question. Where is the referencing, and maybe I missed that because I stepped away for a moment, who is on your advisory group, given that you're soliciting not only feedback from them, but the wider audience? But who's on your advisory group for this?
Yeah, and I'll invite one of my colleagues to sort of navigate back in the slides a little bit. As I noted, we have a national advisory group, Deb. So we have folks advising us through this national body where we've got 1-2 more invitations out for folks that we're waiting to hear back on.
Is that affiliated with NOAA? Is that the same National Heat Campaign group?
No, it's not. Although we will have folks on our advisor group. So this is a New Jersey specific extreme heat resilience action plan advisory group that we formed and invited specifically for this purpose. And actually there might be folks driving or on the phone or whatever. So I'll go ahead and name some of these, say these things out loud for folks that might not be looking at the slides. Kathleen Dolan is from the Association of State and Territorial Health Officers. We've got Beth Gibbons, who is currently the National Resilience Lead at Fairland Strategies, but up until very recently ran the American Society for Adaptation Professionals. Paula Hammond at WSP as their Transportation Infrastructure Lead, also formerly a DOT Commissioner from the state of Washington. Dr. Evan Mallon is at Georgia Tech, and he runs a urban climate lab there and is also an advisor to the Centers for Disease Control's I forget the full name of the program, but it's a resilience program that's national. Mark Rupp is the adaptation program director at the Georgetown Climate Center and a professor of adaptation. And Dr. Vivek Shandis, who is at Portland State. And Deb, you might be familiar, obviously, I know from the work that you guys are doing in Jersey City, that Kappa Strategies, he's one of the initial founders and remains an advisor to Kappa Strategies.
Okay, great.
Yes, of course. So in addition to this body, we're inviting public input through these forums, and then we're also going to develop, we don't have, you know, something to lay out right now for you all, but we will be developing a very intentional strategy for tapping into the expertise of folks in New Jersey as well.
So the municipal level officials and sustainability offices and resiliency offices across each of the municipalities, you're in touch with them?
Not currently, right? We're just launching this process. What we're trying to do is sort of set the stage for what a resilience action plan is, separate and apart from the fact that this first one is on extreme heat. And so as we are developing the strategies that state agencies will take on extreme heat, we'll be talking to a variety of affected stakeholders on this particular climate threat. And that's the same sort of format that you should expect for every resilience action plan.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you. We also have another question in the chat from Ron. When will you expect the first public comment period to be?
So we will have a draft. We're aiming for July. It might be August, but in any case, we're aiming for the summer months. That's our strict goal. Right now, we have a feedback form that's on the website that allows folks to, it's separated into 3 categories. Just dropped a piece of paper. It's separated into 3 categories. The first is sort of helping give some feedback to the approach that we're using in moving from the climate change resilience strategy into these resilience action plans. In the second part, we have some really targeted feedback regarding extreme heat. And in the last section, we're just looking to understand a little bit more about the respondents themselves so that we can sort of parse to the extent that it's possible, understanding of how people are feeling relative to where in New Jersey they might live, what region of the state, you know, age classes, those kinds of things, you know, degree to which they work on climate change on a regular basis, or these are new topics to them. So there's a demographics section at the end.
Thank you, Natalie. We have another question in the chat from Kristen. Can you comment on how the health sector in New Jersey will be engaged in the heat wrap? Is there a specific outreach strategy / plan for feedback? How is New Jersey DOH engaged?
I can keep answering questions, although I also invite Nick to share. So the Department of Health is a member of the Interagency Council, so they are, you know, fully engaged in the same way that all 22 state agencies that are part of the council are engaged in the process. Separately from that, obviously, the health sector is a much broader. It's facilities. It's you know, folks that are advancing health work in specific settings like elder care facilities, possibly daycare centers, etc. What we're hoping to do is, as we sort of release the public version of the plan, the near final version in the summer, to have really intentional outreach to various impacted stakeholder groups. We might see, you know, a session that is dedicated to farm workers, or a session that's dedicated to folks that work with seniors, a section that's dedicated to, you know, folks that are doing construction in the summer months on roads. Again, we haven't scripted out all the details of that, but I will flag that we have a second webinar scheduled for March 2nd. And our hope is that as this process is developing, we can have more to share as we're doing our webinars. We wanted to come out, you know, sort of early and often, as is the best practice, to start getting feedback in the process and then be able to share out additional updates as it advances.
Yeah, and Kristen, I'll add that you should feel free to either, again, using the form that Natalie's referenced, or we can also, I think, put an email in this chat if we haven't already, that you can reach out to us and make recommendations, certainly on, you know, appropriate stakeholders and, you know, kind of when and where it's appropriate to have those conversations.
For advertising this meeting in particular, we use sort of the traditional DEP channels, press releases, and then all of the Interagency Council agency members were invited to also use their channels for advertising. So we're hitting the people that sort of already follow state agency efforts, which means there's a whole world of people that we aren't hitting. So we absolutely invite, you know, recommendations on which is a strategy that we have for the March 2nd webinar as well, to make sure that we are hitting specific stakeholders that would maybe benefit from this presentation.
Thank you. And there's another question from Ron in the chat. If we are on this webinar, will be included in all future correspondence? And I can answer this question. In order to be involved in all future correspondence, you can go on our website, which I can drop in a link shortly after this, and sign up to join our email blast, which will receive all information about the resilience action plans and the work for the Office of Climate Resilience. We have another question from Mike. He's asking, no one from New Jersey is on the advisory board as an example of education, schools, businesses, transportation, and utilities. Either Nick or Natalie, if you want to answer this.
Yeah, when we were thinking through how our advisory group would work, at one point we had like 100 people on a list, and other points we had much shorter lists. And even in conversation with some of the folks that have done this for other states, when the room gets too full, nobody gets a chance to say much, right? So we are intentionally having a smaller group of folks outside of New Jersey that stay with us through a multi-month engagement. And then we're using a separate strategy for engaging different affected, impacted stakeholders. I hope that's clear, Mike. Don't absolutely invite feedback on that approach. There's not a specific question in the feedback form that speaks to that sort of how we're doing feedback generation, but there are several open comment boxes where you are welcome to give some advice or what have you on that.
And again, our colleague Rebecca Hill has posted an email address, climateresilience@dep.nj.gov, that you can utilize to reach out to us.
Okay, and Deborah, I see you have a question. Feel free to unmute yourself. Maybe that was an accident. Okay, I'm going to go to JVICC guest. I see there's a question, a hand raised there too.
Actually, I'm back. I'm
okay.
Sorry, I'm having trouble navigating Teams today.
This is Deborah's voice.
I would have chatted this, yes. Yeah. Is this going to be posted as a presentation? Because this is a nice share with some people who missed today.
Absolutely.
So would this be posted to your website then?
Yeah, we'll have the webinar. We think it'll probably, with the sort of internal time lag to get things on the website, we'll probably have it up on Monday, as well as the slides. Both the recording of this session and the slides will be up on the website early next week.
Terrific. Thanks, Natalie.
Okay. And then JV, were you able to unmute yourself? We're kind of stacking the raised hands. Didn't mean to raise a hand. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, and I also see Kirk, you have your hand raised. If you want to come off mute.
Am I off mute? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. And I'm sorry, I actually didn't get to see the presentation. I thought it started at 4:30, which was my mistake. I think one thing I didn't see in the outline is the aspect of methane emissions. And what I've discovered in the past 6 years is that I've been doing quite a bit of research on facilities in New Jersey, a number of them, and also many others in the country. But I've been astonished to find out that one example, that I had submitted a comment into NJDEP last year to find that they're potentially emitting more than 600 tons of methane every year. But the NJDEP, they're only reporting 1 ton of methane every year in their annual reports. The NJDEP permitting acknowledged that there might be a problem, and they had forwarded my comment on to the compliance division, and I've spoken with the compliance division about it, and they're actually researching it, and I'm going to try to help them understand it better. But one of the things I've discovered is that companies are not reporting their venting annually as they're supposed to, and then 2, we're not, and New Jersey is not tracking we're allowing them to dictate what's tracked. And currently, even in the permitting, we're only looking at combustion methane emissions. So, and to me, this is fundamental in terms of climate change and climate resilience, because if we don't really understand our impact to the area, the environment, and the upstream supply, most people don't understand the total amount of emissions that's occurring every day. And it has, in methane, concentrations actually occur locally. So if you review NOAA monitoring sites of atmospheric concentration of methane, you can see, one, that they're man-made, two, that they're locations near natural gas main lines are increasing. We have one off of Cape May, and we're much higher than the global average of concentration for that location. So it gives me the concept that methane concentrations are highly impacted by what's being released locally, in addition to the concentrations globally. And methane, when it's first emitted, is 120 times at emission point, 120 times the warming potential of carbon dioxide. Not this, we use this 25 times multiplier, but that's based off of the methane being emitted 100 years, over 100. So it's looking at the methane 100 years after it was emitted. So our concept in terms of climate resiliency, climate modeling, is misplaced in terms of trying to figure out when and how, why we're being impacted on climate change. We're not really seeing the concentrations. I also found out, and I'm sorry.
Kirk, I want to interrupt you. So, because I do want to be able to get to other comments and questions here. So let me say first that, right, long term for climate resilience, the most important thing we can do is address our greenhouse gas emissions, right, including methane, right, which we know is much more has much more significant impacts than carbon dioxide. To the extent that there are other programs going on within not only DEP but within the state of New Jersey that are focused on emissions specifically, which based on kind of some of your comments you're aware of and already in communication with. So again, I'd urge you to take a look at the online form and provide whatever comments and recommendations you have, particularly around the resilience action plans and extreme heat in particular. And certainly, again, if there's something that doesn't quite fit into that form, to utilize the email that's been posted. So thanks a lot, but let's make sure that we're able to get to some others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have some more questions in the chat. So one question is from Chip. He said it's a question for the future. If government agencies are responsible for identifying their own relevant actions, how will effective actions and fidelity to those actions be assured? I'm thinking of the Paris Accords as an analogy. Goals were voluntary and countries would pull out from the accords at any time without much consequence. Wondering how New Jersey will avoid a similar dynamic.
So, Chip, I think the answer here is kind of at multiple levels, right? So one, kind of producing this resilience action plan, or any of the resilience action plans, and identifying those actions and some of the information within the tables, right, that Natalie presented. One, kind of lays the state's cards on the table, right, for us to be able to tell you what exactly it is we intend on doing. It's also our intent as we kind of build these resilience action plans and working with our state agency partners to provide not only updates on the resilience action plans themselves, but some level of tracking or reporting on what we're doing. So, we will certainly be. It's our intent to be transparent about how the action plans are actually getting implemented, how we're moving these things forward. And so, you know, you'll be able to see and call us on it, frankly, if we're not implementing the actions that we've identified.
Thank you. Another question in the chat from Jonathan. Will this plan be made in conjunction to the new upcoming energy master plan?
So we'll certainly be looking for opportunities to, how do I want to say this? For opportunities to kind of coordinate with not just other state agencies, but other kind of, you know, major initiatives at the state. I expect honestly that the Extreme Heat Resilience Action Plan will be out and draft and probably final form before the update to the Energy Master Plan. But we do work with all the state agencies, including BPU, who were, you know, significantly involved in the Energy Master Plan, and we're looking for kind of alignment, opportunities for alignment, coordination, ways to leverage those actions to make sure that we're meeting all of the state's goals.
Thank you. Another question in the chat from Ken. Will your plans include resources needed to implement them, budget and manpower, and possible new laws and regulations?
We're taking turns answering questions
Go
here,
ahead,
it
Natalie.
seems. Like we're like on and off and on and off. So we want the actions to include a variety of activities that are happening already that advance extreme heat resilience, activities that are being sort of somewhat modified to increase the extent to which extreme heat is addressed, as well as aspirational goals. And it'll have to be a mix of you know, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sort of mixing questions here, but it would have to be a mix of action types in order to be able to sort of advance the cohesive vision that we're trying to advance for resilience. With respect to budget and manpower, the specifics around how we would go about implementing those things, as you saw in the presentation, and we can go back to the slide if that's helpful, the level of specificity is not like super detailed in each of the actions. You'll certainly see a description of what it is that we're trying to accomplish and why that's an important thing to do, as well as some description of sort of a brief description of an implementation pathway. But the sort of detail of the how would be within the authorities of the respective agencies that are advancing that work. So I don't think that there would be, you know, specific budget numbers associated with each individual action. In cases where there isn't current budget allocation, the agency would have to include a plan for a new initiative in a future budget cycle, in their budget cycle requests that go to the legislature, etc. So it's sort of a mix, I guess, to answer your question.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add, right, we want some of this to be aspirational, right? If there are things, you know, programs, you know, funding decision making, new authorities or regs or whatever the case might be, that we don't currently have the resources for or the authorities for, right? But we think that they would be significantly impactful. We want to lay that out, and I think perhaps this is an action plan, right? Figuring out what actions we take to make this happen, to get to our goals. And so we do want to kind of have that broad mix of types of actions.
There's a question from Ruth. My faith community Quakers would like to know how it can assist with resilience efforts in our communities. Will you consider in your planning how groups like ours can help with resilience?
That's a really great question. I appreciate it very much. I'm trying to think ahead to the kinds of actions that agencies might advance, and often agencies are thinking about a primary audience that is, you know, specific to their programs, and I can't think of a single and maybe this is just a gap in my own knowledge of all the responsibilities of the various executive branch agencies, but I can't think of one where they center faith communities as, one of their primary audiences and constituents that they're serving. Maybe I'll sort of open it up to others to help guide me here. But what I'll say more broadly to the point of wanting to be involved in resilience efforts, certainly there's no question that we all have to be part of what it is to become a more resilient New Jersey. And I would be very happy to, sort of offline a conversation with you that brainstorms around how to advance that work with your community, with faith community in general. Nick,
yeah, I think I'm adding on to your last comment there, right? On the extreme heat resilience action plan, or any of the specific actions, or kind of resilience broadly, right? We need, to Natalie's point, like everybody and everything, right, is got to be the answer. And so we're happy to partner and coordinate with groups across the state. And I think it's something that I think is becoming more and more part of the conversation, but it's just the recognition that kind of, right, your kind of your local organizations, your community-based organizations, your faith communities, are really the kind of the trusted sources of information frequently for our community members, and kind of some, utilizing information and kind of those avenues is really a critical component to making sure that, we're reaching, all of our communities, all of our citizens, all the people in the state.
Okay, also I just wanted to remind everyone about the scoping doc that is online, as well as completing the public feedback form. I'm going to drop the links in the chat again, just so everyone is able to review them. Oh, thank you for putting them on the screen. But I just wanted to give a reminder that all the information will be online. And we're going to try to answer some more questions and being cognizant of the time. I see some things in the chat.
Ken, you've got some follow-up from your question before, and okay, so let me read it out loud. Of course, we're recording the session. We want to make sure that people are watching this later get a chance to sort of get the full gist of the conversation. So the comment is, so without specificity and no details on what needs to be done, how will anything happen? This sounds like writing a plan is the goal. I certainly, from my own personal, just speaking as a person who very much feels the urgency of the climate crisis and works as a climate practitioner on a day-to-day basis, that is not what I'm about. And I don't think that's what any of the folks that are part of the Office of Climate Resilience are also trying to do either. So just naming that, obviously, I don't know how much weight that's going to hold in responding. We want to be able to write plans in a way that all of our agencies can participate. And I think it's important that we are able to advance the work, even if that means that we don't have all the specifics of how to advance the work. I think that's sort of speaking from my own perspective personally. If we wait until we know all the details before making any commitments, then we're also in a situation that doesn't advance relative to the urgency of the climate crisis. So doing our best, very open to feedback, recognizing that a plan that takes a really long time to write and to answer all of the specific questions doesn't exist. We won't have a plan if we wait till all the details are ironed out, and we really want to be able to elevate the importance of this issue.
Thank you. And we have a comment in the chat from Lisa. I would love to see an updated heat map of New Jersey. The one from ArcGIS represents a screenshot of the surface on a specific day in June, cloudless skies. It's Landsat 5. For the thermal infrared band 6, the spatial resolution is 120 meters. So any detail better than that on the map is statistically generated, interloped, and blended between pixels. Just want to uplift that for anyone who's not able to read the chat.
Totally agreed with you, Lisa. I would love that too. We've been having some conversations internally about how to get there. There's a couple approaches from some, private sector folks that would require the department to either generate, secure resources to be able to do that. There are some other ways of doing this work that it is a tighter resolution. certainly something that we need to look at. So appreciate you uplifting that comment, because, you know, our satellites only fly over New Jersey every so often. And if it's a cloudy day, then, you know, we don't get the best data. I wonder if there's any other thoughts you have on that specific question, Nick, that you can uplift as well.
Well, Lisa's talking in a lot more technical detail than I can certainly comment on, but I'll just say that we are working with some of our NGO and academic partners to, you know, and other state agencies to also identify opportunities to kind of expand the, you know, the data that we have to use in our planning and decision making. And I think some of that you'll hopefully see coming out from them, not from us necessarily, in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, we just need better access to drones with capabilities. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give it another minute to see if anyone has any other questions to add in the chat. But while we wait, I'm not sure if any of the panelists have any last remarks. Oh, I see there's a question. Joe, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, and thank you for taking the question. I'm just curious, as we take this forward, what are you doing, or who's helping you being very critical of your messaging? Because as I read the scoping document, the choir is going to sing, right? They're going to believe in this. But you have to get to a broader audience than that. And we won't get to the real deniers, but you have to get to the middle, the undecided, or the more concerned about economic factors of this. And as I read this, I see it very much resonating with the people who believe. And I'm not sure it'll resonate with the people in the middle. It might be a negative reaction. So in order for this to have legs beyond one administration, your messaging is extremely critical. So what are you doing, or how are you looking at that to be critical of yourselves as you message this?
Yeah, it's a really great point, Joe. And it's one that we're putting a lot of thought and effort into, just as an Office of Climate Resilience, right? Because our work is beyond any given initiative or RAP. This is a sort of a consistent need. There's a whole sort of industry of climate professionals that are focused on communications and how we address the needs of this urgent situation in a way that doesn't pivot people towards fear or hopelessness. I don't have a great answer for you right now. Certainly it's something that we're thinking about quite a lot, and we welcome any, you know, specific inputs about, you know, suggestions or strategies. One thing that I would say, I guess, as a specific to the question of who, is that among our advisory group of national experts, we've got folks that are very intentionally looking at effective climate risk communications and are looking for that sort of lens in terms of the way that we are putting out materials. Often the plan document itself is a little wonky, a little boring. It's not really meant to reach people other than people who read plans. But once you're doing the work, the messaging around extreme heat and understanding that people, one of the reasons the silent killer is that people often don't self-identify as being vulnerable and therefore don't seek out the appropriate measures at that individual and household scale. And messaging around that is going to be incredibly important and critical for people to sort of understand what the scale of the problem is.
And Joe, I'll add that, right, this was a specific challenge identified in the statewide strategy, right? And you know, if we're honest with ourselves, not necessarily something that government is also often kind of terribly successful at. And so, kind of trying to take a broad approach to this and utilizing every tool and pathway to kind of have these conversations. Again, kind of I referenced like some of the kind of community-based organizations, but you know, looking at making sure that, you know, as we work with our state agency partners and our other NGO and academic partners, right, that we're utilizing kind of their networks and their you know, their stakeholders to kind of, you know, broadly talk about the issue. It is something that, you know, that takes a significant amount of effort. As you know, as we've seen, you know, we also do a lot of kind of community-based planning, and you know, it is, I think, kind of the most intensive, but also the most critical aspect of that work, and that's no different when we kind of approach it from a state scale.
Thank you. How if I can ask another one, how does someone who's not in an organization, just public, and I know there's public comment, but beyond public comment, how do you get more directly involved?
Our hope is to have a really targeted strategy in the summer months that focuses on different sectors that are highly impacted by extreme heat.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I don't see any follow-up any follow-up questions in the chat. So if there's any last remarks or thank yous, I can open that up now to the panelists.
I will just say thank you for coming. Thank you for everybody who stuck with us through the full hour.
Completely echo that. I see one more hand up. Respecting that folks might have to leave right at 5, so obviously we can take that one last question.
Jonathan?
I was just going to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing here. The tools that you've provided the past few years have been great. And with especially the Inflation Reduction Act, having this as another piece of our foundation is going to make a lot of our efforts collectively a lot more impactful. So thank you for taking the time and doing this.
Thank you all so much. Please join the March 2nd webinar if you'd like another opportunity to sort of offer comments and to advance this work, and please fill out our feedback form.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.